So I felt very fortunate to be able to attend the Western Buddhist Monastics Gathering last week, because I know that not all the monastics get to go every year. And as a freshly hatched baby nun, it was very inspiring for me to be able to meet so many different people from different traditions who have been practicing for a very long time. And many people probably wouldn't be able to attend the gathering on an annual basis because of COVID, because they live all over the world. And so I feel like this gathering was even more rich and diverse with people from all over the place. Because the gathering was on Zoom, it was organized to have little small breakout groups with many different topics each day. And I want to share some of the highlights from the groups that I attended. The group that had the most, that has me reflecting on it the most, was actually the group with the topic of repentance, which I kind of accidentally joined thinking it was more, I had more of an interest in the confession side or purification practices, and wanting to learn kind of the purification practices from different traditions. And I got that confused, which is funny because not coming from a strong Christian background, I've always had kind of an aversion to the word repentance, thinking of images of Jesus on the cross and being consumed in guilt and shame, which I easily slip into anyways. But the reason, so the group actually turned out it was only two other monastics, two other nuns, so it was a very small group. But it was really rich because there was one nun from the Theravada tradition and one nun from the Zen tradition. And they shared that the Theravada tradition, I learned that they did a confession practice, but really just kind of reciting the sutras and not really having any reflection or personal confession involved in the practice. Which I feel loses a lot of the meaning and benefit of confession. Because if you don't look into the actions that you're personally doing, how are you going to grow and change and really make it relevant? And the Zen Japanese, or the Zen tradition, which followed Japanese Zen, didn't have any kind of confession in her practice, but she was very interested in learning more about it. And during this discussion, I realized that the process of confession is very much linked to purification. So they're not separate. And I was able to share that we do purification practices daily at the Abbey. And I was able to share the four opponent powers practice with them and the value of purification, which the nuns were enthusiastically interested in, which kind of, I guess, felt good as a baby nun of being 2 weeks old, sharing with a nun who had been ordained for 30 years and just seeing how rich it was. And she was really interested in it. And having done purification and seeing the benefit of myself, I was speaking highly enthusiastically about it as well. And then when I've realized how much the benefit purification practice has also helped as I'm starting to do the confession practices as well. And at first I, of course, found the confession to be very scary, of exposing myself and opening up. But over time, I've really seen it to be so healing and important for seeing myself as a human being who makes mistakes, seeing the suffering that comes from doing those harmful actions, and being held in such a space of compassion and acceptance when I admit to having done those actions. And then generating the motivation and inspiration that I can change and grow and stop causing harm. And this process brings a feeling of self-acceptance and allows me to feel more genuine and authentic, which is hugely helpful. So I feel really grateful to have these practices to work with in such a kind of raw and direct and exposing way, but in also such a inspiring and nourishing process as well. Another part of that group that one of the nuns shared when I was saying that I was had only been ordained for 2 weeks, she was delighted, and she said that the first few years of being ordained for her was the richest. And we kind of talked about how it's kind of just like compost, how the vegetables are at their largest and grossest and ripest at the beginning, but that's also the time where you see the most change, and it can become a very rich and nourishing process, which was helpful because I've definitely been seeing the afflictions at their grossest full force lately. Some other points that I'd like to share was Bhikkhu Bodhi. I'm sure many of you guys heard this, but it really just struck me again of saying how so much of our society, and we're looking for to recover a sense of meaning. And he says the lack of meaning in our culture stems from the collapse of the pre-modern age, and now we're in a culture with a pervasive sense of meaninglessness. And so because we're lacking that meaning in our lives, we're focused on individualism, trying to get what we want, and fighting against each other. So we have superficial escape routes that are ultimately unsatisfying. I could relate to this because big reason that I came to the Abbey was that for a long time I was leading the life of a ski bum, chasing after little bits of pleasure, and ultimately that were not very satisfying. And I was always looking for a deeper sense of meaning and purpose in my life. Other breakout groups that I joined included topics on social engagement, communication, conflict, cultivating joy, the role of psychotherapy in the Dharma, and the relationship between lay people and monastics. So a very wide range of topics. But I kept seeing how all of these had a reoccurring theme, and they all come back down to creating healthy relationships. So no matter what level we're talking about, whether it's the global and national level of systemic racism, or having conflict with someone on a more personal relationship level, it all comes back to recognizing just the basic humanity of each other, to have an underlying basis of respect and trust, and wanting to understand that person. It was noted that the underlying motivation for communicating must be the wish to connect. And when that is held as the primary focus, then the communication goes in a much different, more satisfying direction. As one monastic put it, we need to be more interested in understanding rather than just being understood. Another monk shared that opening up and being honest depersonalizes the struggles, which is similar to the purification practice of just opening up and not seeing it as a personal thing or a personal flaw, but saying, yes, we're all struggling. How can we struggle together rather than against each other? When we recognize our shared humanity and our shared mistakes, it takes away that power dynamic of trying to prove ourselves as being better than one or the other. He also shared that part of his practice is listening deeply and speaking honestly. And he shared a process of communication that is taught by the organization called Insight Dialogue, that involves the steps of pausing, relaxing, opening, attuning to emergence, listening deeply, and speaking the truth. These are definitely steps that I would like to learn more about and practice more deeply. And another point was that if you want to establish a practice of speaking and listening openly, start with the small stuff, and that builds a foundation for when you have to have heavier and harder conversations, because that builds a sense of trust, and which is so important for healthy relationships. One question was raised that I have also been trying to work on for a long time, and that is the question of when to speak up versus when to be quiet. The responses seem to say that it is a dance and an art that is slowly learned, but that it's a key part of that dance is to really check in with my motivation. Most often it's coming from a place of self-centeredness, which means it is often better to be quiet. But as we see in our country today, and as I have experienced in many of my own relationships, being quiet can also be equally as harmful. So it is a tricky dance. And I have a lot of areas to work in this with my mind. And I'm trying to, seeing in myself that I tend to lean on the side of being quiet, I'm trying to push myself to the other direction of being a little more speaking up and seeing what that feels like. So I've got a lot of rich vegetables to work on and to feed the compost in my mind. The final big takeaway that I got from this gathering was really seeing just what a beacon of light the Abbey is and Venerable Shodron is in guiding monastics across the West and across the world. Not many people have the opportunity to live in such a healthy, well-structured community. And I truly believe that this is the best place to grow as a monastic and to learn the Dharma. So I also want to thank all the residents for making this opportunity possible and for making my first Western monastic gathering a very, very rich and fruitful one. So thank you.